Good afternoon and welcome to the 696th meeting of the Economic Club of New York. I'm Barbara Van Allen, President and CEO of the club. The Economic Club of New York is known as being the nation's leading nonpartisan forum for discussions on economic, social, and political issues. We've had more than 1,000 prominent guest speakers appear before the club over the last century and have a strong tradition of excellence, which continues to today's event. I want to extend a warm welcome to students from Mercy College, the Gabelli School of Business at Fordham, Harvard University, and Columbia, who are joining us virtually today. We also have some members of our largest ever class of 2023 ECNY Fellows, a select group of diverse, rising, next-gen business thought leaders. I believe this year is actually going to cross the 70 mark, so a new high for us. I'm really, truly honored to welcome our special guest today, Nobel Laureate Richard Thaler, the Charles R. Walgreen Distinguished Service Professor of Economics and Behavioral Science at the University of Chicago's Booth School of Business. This is a day we've been working toward for a couple of years, so we're thrilled to have this come true. Prior to coming to Chicago in 1995, Richard was a professor at Cornell's Johnson School of Management. He's also a research associate at the National Bureau of Economic Research. His research lies in the gap between psychology and economics. He's considered a pioneer in the fields of behavioral economics and finance. He's the author of numerous academic articles and the books including The Winner's Curse, Nudge, and Misbehaving. In 2015, he served as the president of the American Economic Association, is a distinguished fellow of the American Finance Association, a fellow at the Econometric Society, and a member of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences and the National Academy of Science. In 2017, he was awarded the Nobel Prize in Economic Sciences. Richard's a founding partner of Thaler Asset Management, located in San Mateo, California, which invests in U.S. equities via mutual funds and separate accounts. The format today will be a conversation, and we're delighted to have club trustee and the Robert M. Beren Professor of Economics at Harvard University, Greg Mankiw, with us today doing the honors of moderating. In addition, we're going to use the chat box for the conversation. You can enter questions directly there for their consideration if time permits. As a reminder, this conversation's on the record, as we do have media on the line, actually quite a bit of media. So Greg, if you're ready, I'm happy to pass the mic over to you.
I'm ready, Barbara. Thank you very much for that introduction. Richard, it is such an honor to be with you. I've been one of your fans for many, many years, so I'm really delighted that we have this time to chat. When I was a student, there wasn't such a field as behavioral economics. And when I first heard the term, I wasn't even quite sure what it meant because I thought all of economics was about behavior. So for people in the audience that are old like me and don't know what behavioral economics is, can you sort of define it for us?
Yeah, Herb Simon, who was sort of a behavioral economist, had a line in an encyclopedia where he defined behavioral economics, and he posed the same question you did. He said, one might ask, what other economics could there be? He said the phrase is a neoplasm, which means redundant phrase. And he said the answer lies in the assumptions of economics. So we wouldn't need behavioral economics if economics had followed the path starting with Adam Smith and leading to Keynes, all of whom I call behavioral economists. And then there was a turn after World War II in which economics became much more mathematical, and mathematical models are easier if you have rational agents. And if they're subject to human frailties, then it gets harder. And since everyone, including economists, have bounded rationality, it's easier to do economics with rational agents who are unemotional and have no self-control problems. And fortunately, there are bright young people like your colleagues, David Laibson and Matthew Rabin and so forth, who are up to the challenge of doing the hard kind of economics, which includes humans.
Yes, we actually have a big program now in behavioral economics, including David Laibson and Matthew Rabin, plus several others. So it's really a big deal at Harvard right now, thanks to you and Kahneman, Tversky, and other people who really got this field going. Now, you're now at Chicago, which I would think of as really the home of rational economics. I think of Gary Becker as being the sort of pinnacle of sort of like of the rational man who was applying it to all sorts of models. Did you talk to Gary about behavioral economics? I'm sure you must have. How did that conversation go?
Well, I'm sure you met Gary. He's a very friendly guy, very soft-spoken, and never took anything personally. So we got along quite well and had lots of interesting discussions. We had an interesting exchange about self-control. So he and Kevin Murphy have a paper about rational addiction, in which people get addicted rationally. They anticipate it. And I mentioned that alcoholics sometimes take the drug Antabuse, which has the effect of making them vomit if they ingest alcohol. And I pointed out that would never happen in his model, because it would have the effect of raising the price of the thing to which they're addicted. And he said, well, we could incorporate that, but it wouldn't be very interesting. So we had lots of exchanges like that over the years. But yeah, I think his goal was to export the rational economic model to other social sciences. And I had the goal of importing useful bits of social science into economics.
Right. It's like, I mean, Kahneman and Tversky were trained as psychologists, even though they got the Nobel Prize in economics, because they, along with you, imported a lot of psychology into economics. What other examples do you use to convince people to be skeptical of the rational model? So I like that example with the alcoholics. Are there others that you think that you find particularly persuasive?
Well, I've done a lot of work on what I call the economics of self-control, and there's a famous story I tell about being in graduate school and hosting a bunch of economics graduate students for dinner and putting out a bowl of cashews and cocktails. And after a few minutes, half the bowl was gone, and I grabbed the bowl and hid it in the kitchen. And I came back and people thanked me. And then, since we were all economics graduate students, we commenced to have a discussion about how we were happy, but we weren't allowed to be happy, because in any economic model, more choices can't make you worse off. And we had one fewer choice than we used to. So that eventually led to an interest in retirement savings and the design of retirement plans. And we know, and your colleague David Laibson has done much of the work in this area as well, that if you simply make the default joining the 401k plan, for example, 90% of people join immediately. And which box is pre-checked should not matter in any economic model where hundreds of thousands of dollars potentially are at stake, but it does. And I will say that the surprising thing is that I think the subfield of economics where behavioral approaches have had their biggest impact is finance. And if you had asked me in 1985, I wrote my first finance paper in 1985, and I also wrote a marketing paper. And if you had asked me which I would bet on as having an impact, I would have put all my money on marketing. And that turned out not to be a big deal. But finance has become more and more behavioral, both in academia and in the world. I mean, it's, Matt Levine has a full-time job at Bloomberg telling funny stories about the financial market. And the idea that financial markets would be funny enough to support a full-time columnist is not something we would have anticipated 30 years ago. But, the first principle of financial economics is the law of one price. And everything, all of the formal theory starts with that. And it's very easy to find counterexamples to that. Right now, there's an amusing one going on with AMC, the movie theater chain, and that has set up another kind of stock that they call apes, and which is named after, it's a meme stock, and the people who follow those call themselves apes, and they created another ticker symbol that you and I would consider to be identical, but they don't trade for the same price. So there are dozens of those, and I challenge you to think of a rational story to explain them.
I recently saw an interview with Cliff Asness, the founder of hedge fund AQR Capital Management. And he was, as you probably know, he was a PhD from the University of Chicago, a pharma student. And he said on this call that when he left the University of Chicago, he was 75% pharma, 25% Thaler. And that having worked now in financial markets for several decades, he's now 75% Thaler and 25% pharma.
Yeah, well, he's an active hedge fund manager, and I think the 25% he gives to Gene is a courtesy to his beloved advisor.
Yeah, and his trades are very much looking for anomalies along the lines that to make more easier to understand from a behavioral standpoint than than from a sort of a efficient market standpoint. Now, does this change how you invest your own money for retirement? I was a student of Bert Malkiel, so I put all my money in index funds. I have a little bit with Cliff Asness, actually, but very little. But most of my money's in index funds. Do you do something different than that?
Well, not with my retirement money so much, but as the intro mentioned, I'm a partner in an asset management firm, not as big as Cliff, but we manage.
And you guys outperform most active managers don't outperform the market. That's what I learned from Bert Malkiel. Do you guys systematically outperform the market?
Let me see if I can find some wood. But our two largest funds both outperformed their benchmarks by more than 10% last year, and have long-term track records. Not like that, but significantly outperforming. And all of our strategy are explicitly behavioral, in the sense that what we're trying to do is identify the mistakes that other people make. And it's like, here's an example. If you go into a restaurant that's sort of dimly lit, and somebody at the front desk is leading you to your table, and there's a little step down at some point, he or she will say, watch your step. And that's because they know that that's a place where people trip. And similarly, in financial markets, you can anticipate the mistakes that people make. And when they are mistakes that leave stocks undervalued, those are the ones that we try to buy.
Are you looking at systematic biases, like factors that you look for, or are you looking really for more idiosyncratic kind of situations like that AMC situation that you mentioned a moment ago?
No, the AMC thing is just weird, and it's an example where rational theory says it can't be that there are two ticket symbols that have the same economic value and have different prices, but those are not arbitrage opportunities because you can't convert one into the other. And if you try to be smart and go long the cheap one and short the expensive one, you can find them diverging, which is exactly what happened to long-term capital management back in the day.
That's what the market. This is what Keynes said: the market can be irrational longer than you're solvent.
Right. So basically, what we try to do is find a class of situations that, as my partner used to say, are good fishing ponds, and then among those, we use some proprietary methods to say which of those. So, for example, firms that have earnings surprises, we've known for 40 years, tend to have subsequent earnings surprises. And so if you can predict that analysts will get more optimistic in the future, you're going to make money. So we start with that, which is common. Everybody knows that. But we have
That's related to the momentum trade, isn't it?
Well, no, because what we're trying to do is forecast future momentum.
I see.
Right. So if today you announce an earnings surprise, the price went up today, but there's no 6 or 12-month momentum yet. So what we're trying to do is find the situations where the earnings surprise today isn't fully incorporated by the market yet. And that over the next year or two, it will have better than expected. And, if you can be right 55% of the time on judgments like that, then you beat the market.
Well, I always thought the best evidence for the efficient markets team was the fact that index funds outperform 85% of active managers. Is that just because the 85% of them are as irrational as the day trader sitting at home?
No, look, I agree with you, and I think that it's perfectly rational to invest your money in index funds. I have all of my money in index funds or funds managed by Fuller and Thaler. So, but the fact that the average golfer is lousy, but Tiger Woods is good, right? So the fact that the average golfer is lousy doesn't tell you that it's impossible to be good. It's hard. And I think efficient market hypothesis is approximately true, but it's not impossible to beat it.
So let's move from finance to public policy.
Yeah.
How do you think about the role of behavioral economics in helping formulate public policy?
Well, another one of your colleagues, my former colleague, Cass Sunstein, and I wrote a book back in 2008 called Nudge. And the idea was, is it possible for us to design policies that make it easier for humans to make better decisions? And the retirement idea that we talked about briefly before, of automatically enrolling people into the plan, but giving them the option of opting out, is an example of such a policy. We call our philosophy libertarian paternalism, which was designed to annoy as many people as possible. The libertarians are angry that we stole their word, and everybody hates paternalists. So, but there are now so-called nudge units. Somebody counted 400 around the world that have been started since we wrote that book. And the way I describe it is the world has gotten a lot easier in the last 20 years because of GPS. I have a terrible sense of direction, but I have a map in my pocket, and I get lost way less than I used to. And what our sort of dream is making the world more like walking around in a strange city with Google Maps in your pocket. And we can do that with lots of things. And the question is, where can you find them? And we recently revised this book, and in a commitment strategy similar to moving the cashews, I insisted on calling this new version Nudge the Final Edition, because my co-author has been known to write books in an hour or so. So I needed to tie him to the mast to make sure he didn't revise it. But one thing we did in that book is we introduced a new term that we call sludge, which is, our goal is make it easy. Whatever you're doing, make it easy if you want people to do it. And there's lots of sludge in the system that makes stuff hard. It's like life without GPS. One example is my colleague Austin Goolsbee had an idea that I love, which is that the IRS should send people a pre-populated tax return. And for people who take the standard deduction, which is about 90% of taxpayers now, they could just click yes. In Sweden, you file your tax return by text message. You get a message saying, we think we owe you 1,100 kroners. If you agree, click here, and the money appears in your account. When they tried to get that law passed, instead, there was a law passed forbidding the IRS from doing that. You can guess the companies that supported that lobbying effort. Instead, those companies, namely TurboTax, Intuit, and H&R Block, promised that they would do free tax returns, which, of course, good luck finding those. But there's no reason for anybody on either side of the political aisle to oppose giving people a pre-populated tax return. People spend hundreds of dollars filling out a return that they needn't do, and lots of hours. The number of hours spent doing that stuff is ridiculous. And this applies in all kinds of things. Think about the institution of a notary public. Why in the world does that institution still exist? I can give you during the pandemic, one of the good things, there were lots of good things. One was DocuSign more or less replaced having to sign some document and scan it and send it back. That's the way the world should be moving. And I think governments should all be striving to get rid of sludge, as should employers, by the way. I mean, the filling in an expense report shouldn't be a lot of work. It's gotten much better at University of Chicago, but all of these things can be made easier, and that's one of the things we emphasize in the new version of this book.
I mean, the one I didn't. I've not read the new version. I have read it when it first came out. It's a wonderful book. I think I signed it in a class seminar that I was teaching for undergrads, and they loved it too. But I remember one of the things that I thought about it was, yes, the government can sort of nudge people in useful directions, but government itself is not a fully rational institution, right? And I kind of wonder, together with behavioral economics, maybe we need behavioral political science. And it's something that's a competition between sort of imperfect private decision makers and imperfect public decision makers as to who's more imperfect, or I guess relatedly, who's the creator of sludge? I mean, a lot of sludge is created by the government. Look at the tax code.
Well, that intentionally, I chose the example of the government passing a law forbidding itself from providing a free service, right? That's ridiculous. So I'm not saying that the government knows all, but there are many situations. Here, I'll give you an example. Social Security is a system that requires almost no thinking by participants. They only have to make one decision, which is when to start claiming.
And most people do that wrong, right?
97% of people do it wrong. Almost everybody, unless you're sick when you're 62, you should wait until you're 70. And because the annuity, it's a real an inflation adjusted annuity, and Social Security provides that at below market prices. So I waited until I was 70. When we wrote that book, we made fun of the Social Security Administration, that the only decision people had to make, they offered a little tool, a little calculator to help people do this. And it was online and it was available Monday through Friday, 9 to 5. Now, where they find a computer that only works banker's hours, I don't know. Peter Orszag and I, after the book came out, he was the head of Congressional Budget Office, I think. He organized a meeting with the SSA and to ask them about this.
I think he was OMB, by the way. He was at OMB. Peter was head of OMB.
He was at OMB right at that point. And their response was to take the calculator down. And so, I can write, you and I used to be part of a team at the New York Times that wrote columns, and I wrote one about that. But I don't have the ability to get them to, I tell people, wait until you're 70 as long as you're healthy. But so look, if I have a financial decision to make personally, I ask my colleague, Doug Diamond, what to do, because he's the smartest guy I know about financial markets. And there's somebody smart who understands things, and the government has access to experts, and they won't always get it right, but certainly Social Security could do better. I mean, here's another very behavioral thing. They have some age that they call the standard retirement age, and it's been gradually changing. It's a completely meaningless, I think it's 65.7 now or something like that. There's nothing standard about it. There's nothing optimal about it. So even the names they give to various things can be helpful or unhelpful. So let's make them helpful. And no, they won't always get it right, but there are lots of situations, every once in a while, Google Maps makes a mistake, but way less than you and I.
Economists are notorious for disagreeing with one another. Do you think behavioral economists agree more? Let me tell you a story about why I asked the question. Jason Furman once told me that when he was chairman of the Council of Economic Advisors, the Obama administration wanted to send some checks out to stimulate the economy after the Great Recession. And they had two ways of sending the same amount of money, either changing withholding or sending special checks. People are getting the same amount of money, so neoclassical economists would say it doesn't matter. So they called a bunch of behavioral economists, which would stimulate consumer spending more. And they got people 50-50 on two different sides. Even the behavioral economists couldn't agree. So are behavioral economists as argumentative about public policy as economists in general, or is there more consensus?
Well, I think I was one of the people that talked to Jason. I certainly remember talking to Jason about it. It's complicated because my answer was, if your goal is to stimulate spending, then change the withholding, because the people you care about are sort of living paycheck to paycheck, and they'll spend what they have. But I said, that method will not be noticed. And so it may not be optimal politically. And in fact, when President Trump had the same situation, he insisted on sending out checks and in fact waiting until they could get his famous signature on the checks. So I think he did it the wrong way economically and the right way politically, and President Obama did the opposite.
The people who are interested in behavioral economics, and the younger generation, seem to be moving past just psychology. You import a lot of psychology to economics. They're now importing neuroscience or genomics into economics. Do you think that's promising? And do you think that is that the way? If you were a young scholar, would you be taking neuroscience courses to understand economics better?
I would say so far, if I look at my magic 8 ball, I would say the returns are cloudy. Look, why did we borrow from Kahneman and Tversky? They gave me, I claim to have discovered them. Other people seem to think they existed before I met them, but I think that was my big academic achievement, was finding them. And what they did was say, here are the predictable mistakes, like what we were talking about in financial markets. Neuroscience has not really provided this kind of portable tool. So where have we made progress in behavioral economics? It's in saying, look, people make this kind of mistake, and it leads them to make decisions that are different from the predictions that somebody like Greg Mankiw would make based on a standard rational model. So if we can find those, we should use them. Sociology, for example, has not really provided much.
And why is that?
I don't know the answer to that, and it's not necessarily a criticism of sociology. It's what they produce isn't in a form that's readily borrowable. And look, that's true of 99% of psychology as well. The judgment and decision-making research that Kahneman and Tversky pioneered was particularly useful. And, the kind of things that clinical psychologists know, that could be useful in trying to understand what Putin is up to, right? Maybe we would like President Biden to have a consulting clinical psychologist to help him understand Putin. But so I don't think, look, I'm let all flowers bloom, but people have been doing neuroscience and trying to use it in economics for 20 years. And my challenge to them has always been, tell me something that I didn't think I already knew, or tell me something that I thought I knew and is wrong. And so far, they haven't.
Now, has obviously psychology's had a big impact on economics. Has there been any effect in the other direction? Have economists affected how psychologists think at all, or has it been complete? I know getting back to our Gary Becker discussion, he wanted to, invade all other social sciences with the economic model. Has your collaboration with psychologists changed psychology? I mean, it's profoundly changed economics. I was wondering how broad it is.
So I think no. And here's another surprising thing. So when Kahneman and Tversky and I met each other and started working together, we thought that if behavioral economics emerged, it would be interdisciplinary, because that's what we were doing. They're two psychologists, I'm an economist, and we work together. That hasn't really happened. Behavioral economics is done 99% by economists. And I think it's because the entry barriers to economics are very high. And other social scientists find what we do to be both technical and boring. And so there maybe are a dozen psychologists that have really engaged over the last 40 years. But most people are happy to let us do it. And
do they have a point? Is what we do a little? Are the barriers too high? Are we a little too technical and a little too boring?
Well, I don't think any more than any other technical field, right? I find physics pretty technical and kind of interesting in a way. Like, I'd love to know how they do it, but not enough to learn. And so I think, interdisciplinary research in general, my experience has been, sounds better than it turns out.
Yeah, donors to universities love it. They love funding interdisciplinary work.
Right. And then you create some center for something or other, and you have groups of people that never end up talking to one another because whatever.
So if you're, I'm sure there's students in the audience. If there's some prospective behavioral economists, you wouldn't necessarily tell them to go to the psychology department. You tell them, go talk to David Laibson or Richard Thaler.
No, I would say read psychology. And I wish, David Laibson and Matthew Rabin and I read a lot of psychology. And now grad students just read Laibson and Rabin, right? They learn the psychology secondhand. And there are some exceptions. I have a young colleague, Alex Emis, who reads a lot of psychology, but that's not the norm. So, but what I would suggest to students is that there are lots of fields of economics that behavioral economics could make big contributions to and hasn't yet. And my number one nomination would be macro.
Yes, my colleague Javier Gebex is working in that area.
That's right, but it's Xavier and 5 others.
Yes, I agree.
By the way, and Xavier's economics is not particularly easy.
No. No, it isn't. We have a question here from the audience asking you, what do you think about Bob Schiller's work in narrative economics? I think it's that falls within the broad scope of behavioral.
Yes, absolutely. And it's obviously true that people tend to think in terms of stories. And I think it's right. And I don't know exactly how to apply it. But going back to macro, Bob and George Akerlof had a working group at NBER for like 25 years, and 10 people would show up. And, these are two future Nobel laureates, and they couldn't get a quorum.
Right.
So,
well, I remember when I was a student, the people like Tom Sargent were telling people, they weren't telling you to go to the psychology department. They're telling you to go to the electrical engineering department, one of these optimal control technimes. So it's a very different set of advice. Maybe
right.
I wish I had more advice from people like you. Maybe could have helped push along behavioral economics, macroeconomics.
Talk to me before you write the next revision.
Well, we only have a few minutes left, 3 minutes, I think. So I want to ask you about, how did the Nobel Prize change your life?
Not, look, there are not in a major way. Maybe, there are 4 Nobel laureates on my floor at Chicago booth. So you certainly don't get treated like royalty at the office. Okay, another guy. So no, I don't think.
No, there's no bragging rights at the club or something like that. No.
Becker had a line once. Somebody mentioned somebody's name, and Becker sneered or something, and well, he did win the Nobel Prize, and Becker said, "Yeah, but he had to share it."
That's pretty funny. Well, anyway, Richard, thank you so much for taking this time. I'm going to turn the floor back over to Barbara. This has been an absolute delight. Thank you, Richard.
Thank you, Greg. It was a pleasure.
Many thanks to you both. Wow, what a fun conversation. Really, really a treat for our members and their guests today. So just a quick look forward. Our next event's March 1st. We'll have a signature luncheon with the global CEO of L'Oreal, Nicholas Aronymous. He is going to be joined in a fireside chat with ECNY Chair Emerita Marie-José Kravis. Later in the spring, we have additional luncheons planned, one with Jen Easterly, the Director of Cybersecurity Infrastructure. You can see there on the screen, March the 23rd. She's going to discuss why corporate cyber responsibility is more important than ever. That'll be followed by Robin Hayes, the President and CEO of JetBlue, March the 29th, to discuss recent travel issues and what the airlines are doing to improve customer experiences, as well as the strategy behind the planned merger with Spirit Airlines. On April 4th, we have our annual Women in Business Conference, along with the Council Generals of Canada and France. That'll be a morning conference focused on women in business, so stay tuned as we announce speakers. On April 13th, we go to a webinar with Dr. Ella Washington, who is an organizational psychologist and professor at Georgetown University's McDonough School of Business. And she will be examining inclusive leadership and the evolution underway in workplace cultures. And then finally for today, in terms of announcements, April 13th, we'll have a luncheon discussion on where the markets may be going this year, with insights on investing in technology, in particular with Lee Ainsley, founder and managing partner of Maverick Capital and a member of our board. Finally, I'd like to take a quick moment to recognize those of our 361 members of the Centennial Society joining us today, as their contributions continue to provide the financial backbone of support for the club and all of our programming. So again, many thanks, Richard and Greg, and thank you to all who have joined us this afternoon, and have a great rest of the day.